Picture two people receiving the exact same piece of bad news. One spends the rest of the day replaying it, snapping at people who don't deserve it, unable to focus on anything else. The other reads it, goes quiet for a moment, and then simply continues their day. Same news, same stakes, completely different aftermath. You've met someone like the second person, maybe a boss, a parent, an old professor. Nothing seemed to move them, not because nothing bad ever happened to them, plenty did, but because bad news seemed to lose its grip on them faster than it does on everyone else. For most of history, we've called this being calm, as if it's a temperament you're born with, like eye color. But the Stoics who studied this 2,000 years ago came to a very different conclusion. They didn't believe calm was a personality trait. They believed it was a skill, built from a small number of deliberate mental habits that anyone could learn, and almost nobody does, because nobody ever explains what those habits actually are. Today we're going to go through 6 of them, not tips, not affirmations, actual mechanisms. The internal moves the most composed people make, usually without even realizing they're making them. And the last one is the one that separates people who merely seem calm from people who actually are. Before we get into it, if this channel is helping you build that kind of steadiness, subscribe now. New videos on Stoic philosophy and practical composure come out regularly, and you won't want to miss what's next. Here's what almost nobody tells you about stress. It rarely comes from the event itself. It comes from the story you immediately attach to the event. Your flight gets delayed. That's the event. This always happens to me. My whole trip is ruined. That's the story. The delay lasts 3 hours either way. But one version of you spends those 3 hours in quiet frustration, and the other spends them furious, texting complaints, ruining the mood of everyone around them. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus put it plainly. People are not disturbed by things, but by the opinions they form about things. That single idea, properly understood, is the seed of everything we're about to cover. It means the event was never really the problem. The problem was how fast your mind rushed to interpret it, and how little say you had in that process because nobody ever taught you to slow it down. So the real question isn't, how do I stop bad things from happening? Bad things are going to happen regardless. The real question is, how do the most composed people interrupt that automatic rush from event to reaction? That interruption is where everything changes. Let's start with the first move. Habit 1. The half-second delay. There's a famous idea worth remembering. Between what happens to you and what you do about it, there's a gap. Most people don't know the gap exists, so they skip straight through it. Here's a concrete way to see this. Imagine you send a message to a colleague and they reply with something short and a little cold. Within half a second, your brain has already generated a theory. They're annoyed with me. I must have done something wrong. This is going to be a problem. None of that is confirmed. It's a guess dressed up as a fact. And your body is already reacting to the guess. Tighter chest, faster typing, a defensive reply forming. The people who stay composed under pressure aren't skipping that step because they're wired differently. They've simply trained themselves to notice the half second before the guess turns into a reaction and hold it open a little longer. Not to suppress the feeling, that never works for long, but to ask one quiet question before acting on it. Is this reaction responding to what actually happened, or to the story I just wrote about it? Seneca, writing to a friend about anger centuries ago, said the safest remedy for anger was to delay it, because time strips away the exaggeration and leaves only what's real. That's the mechanism. Delay doesn't get rid of the feeling. It gets rid of the exaggeration riding on top of the feeling. So what's left is small enough to handle. Try this the next time something stings. A comment, a slight, an inconvenience. Don't suppress it. Don't perform calm. Just wait one full breath before you speak or type. That single breath is where the next 5 moves become possible. Without it, none of them work. Habit 2. Choosing what the moment means. Once you've bought yourself that half second, something interesting becomes available. You get to decide what this moment is actually about. Here's an example most people will recognize. 2 employees get the same piece of critical feedback from a manager. One hears it as, "I'm not good enough, they regret hiring me." The other hears it as, "Here's a gap I didn't know I had, and now I can close it." Same words, same manager, same room. But they walk out of that meeting living in 2 different realities because they each assign the feedback a different meaning. And that meaning, not the feedback itself, is what shapes the rest of their week. This is not about forcing fake positivity onto painful things. Some events genuinely are losses, and pretending otherwise is its own kind of dishonesty. The Stoic move is narrower and more honest than that. It's recognizing that you rarely get to choose what happens, but you almost always get to choose which of several honest interpretations you settle into. This is a disaster, and this is a difficult problem I now get to solve, can both be true readings of the same fact. Only one of them leaves you able to act. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire during plague, war, and constant betrayal, kept returning to a version of this same idea in his private notebook. Strip the event down to what actually, literally happened. Remove the dramatic language your mind adds on top, and you'll usually find it smaller and more workable than it felt a moment ago. This is why composed people seem almost suspiciously unbothered by setbacks that would flatten someone else. They're not in denial. They've simply gotten fast at separating the bare fact from the story and choosing, deliberately, which story earns their energy. Habit 3. Naming the actual fear. Here's something strange about anxiety. It's rarely about a specific thing. It's a fog. A vague sense that something bad is coming without ever quite specifying what. Seneca noticed this 2,000 years ago and wrote something that still holds up. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Not because our imagined disasters are worse than real ones, sometimes they're not, but because imagined disasters are formless. A real problem has edges. You can see where it starts and where it ends. A vague dread has no edges at all, so it expands to fill whatever space you give it. Here's the practical version. Next time you notice that low hum of anxiety about a meeting, a diagnosis, a conversation you're avoiding, stop and ask yourself a blunt question. What, specifically, am I afraid will happen? Not the feeling. The actual event. Say it in one plain sentence. I'm afraid they'll say no. I'm afraid I'll get the numbers wrong in front of everyone. I'm afraid this will end the relationship. Something almost always happens the moment you do this. The fear gets smaller. Not because the outcome improved, but because a named, specific fear is something you can actually make a plan for, and a formless one isn't. Composed people aren't fearless. They've just gotten fast at converting fog into a sentence. And a sentence, unlike fog, can be worked with. Habit 4. Caring without clinging. Here's where people usually misunderstand Stoicism, so it's worth clearing up directly. None of this means not caring. A person who feels nothing isn't calm. They're just numb, and numbness is not a skill worth having. The distinction the Stoics drew was between caring about outcomes and clinging to them. Caring means you prepare thoroughly. You show up fully invested. You want the good result. Clinging means your entire sense of okayness is hostage to whether that result arrives. And clinging is exactly what makes people so easy to shake. Because anyone who can threaten the outcome you're clinging to now has leverage over your entire emotional state. Think of someone launching a small business. Caring looks like doing the market research, pricing things carefully, showing up for every customer. Clinging looks like checking sales numbers every 20 minutes and feeling their whole identity rise and fall with each one. The version of them that's clinging will burn out or panic pivot at the first slow week. The version that's caring without clinging can absorb a slow week, learn from it, and keep building, because their sense of being okay was never fully outsourced to that week's numbers in the first place. The Stoics called the healthy version of this a kind of inner reserve, holding your effort at full strength, while holding your attachment to the result a little more loosely. It sounds almost contradictory until you've felt it. You can want something intensely and still be fine if it doesn't arrive, because your peace was never fully staked on it arriving. This is the peace that makes the first 3 habits sustainable. You can pause, reframe, and name your fears all day. But if your entire well-being is still chained to one specific outcome, all of that just becomes a longer, more polite panic. Loosen the grip on the outcome, and everything before it finally has room to do its job. Habit 5. The circle you actually control. Most of what unsettles people during a hard week has one thing in common. It's something they can't actually control. Whether someone else likes them, whether the market moves in their favor, whether a decision made 3 years ago by someone else finally comes back around. People burn enormous amounts of energy gripping tightly onto things that were never theirs to hold in the first place. Epictetus opened his entire philosophy with a version of this exact distinction. Some things are up to us and some things are not. Our judgments, our effort, our choices, our responses, those are ours. Other people's opinions, the economy, the weather, what someone else decides to do with the information you gave them. Those are not, no matter how much it feels like they should be. Here's what this looks like in an ordinary week. You send a strong pitch to a client. Whether they say yes is not up to you. That decision belongs entirely to them. What is up to you is whether the pitch was well prepared, honest, and the best you had to offer. Composed people learn to feel finished the moment they've done their part fully, instead of staying anxious until the part that was never theirs resolves itself. This isn't passivity, it's precision. It means directing every ounce of your energy at the narrow strip of the situation that actually belongs to you, and consciously releasing your grip on the much larger portion that never did. Most anxiety is just energy pointed at the wrong half of that line. Habit 6. The discomfort you choose on purpose. This last one is the piece that rarely gets taught, and it's the reason some people can absorb a genuine crisis without falling apart, while others are destabilized by a delayed email. The Stoics had an unusual habit. They deliberately practiced small discomforts before life forced any on them. Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, would occasionally eat the plainest food and sleep on the hardest bed he could find, not out of guilt, but as a kind of rehearsal. His reasoning was direct. If you've never tested what the worst case actually feels like, your imagination will always make it bigger and scarier than reality. The rehearsal shrinks the fear down to its real size. You can see a modern version of this anywhere. Resilience gets trained on purpose. Cold showers, hard physical training, deliberately having the difficult conversation you've been avoiding instead of the easy one. None of these events are dangerous. What they train is something more useful than toughness. Proof, stored in your own memory, that discomfort is survivable. And once your nervous system has that proof on file, the next unplanned hardship doesn't feel like evidence that you're in danger. It feels like something you've already survived a smaller version of. This is the real difference between someone who seems calm and someone who actually is. The performer is calm right up until something genuinely difficult happens, because they've never tested themselves against difficulty on their own terms. The person who's done the rehearsal has already met a version of hard on purpose when the stakes were low. So when hard shows up uninvited, it's meeting someone who's already been there before. None of these 6 habits require you to feel less. That was never the goal. And anyone selling you numbness isn't teaching Stoicism. What they require is a small gap between what happens and what you do about it. A gap most people never open, because nobody ever told them it was there. The delay gives that gap room to exist. Choosing the meaning decides what fills it. Naming the fear turns fog into something workable. Caring without clinging keeps your peace from being hostage to any single outcome. The circle you actually control tells you exactly where to spend your energy and where to let go. And the discomfort you choose on purpose means that when real difficulty finally arrives, some part of you has already been rehearsing for this exact moment. None of this makes hard things stop happening. It just changes who you are by the time they do. If this video gave you something worth holding on to, subscribe. This channel exists to help you build a mind that doesn't get shaken loose so easily. And there's a lot more of that ahead.